She's like, bag of corner peas, great idea. Put a towel between the vulva and the bag, though. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Like, that would have made my career a lot more comfortable.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of On The Horizon, a podcast about what's on the horizon for sex workers and how to navigate it.
I'm Jessie Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at sapiotextual and at jessiesage.com.
And I'm Melrose Michaels, and you can find me at Melrose Michaels on social and melrosemichaels.com.
Just a reminder, if you are enjoying the podcast on Apple, please leave us a 5-star rating and review because it really helps us to grow as a podcast and better share information from our guests to the sex work community as a whole.
Last but not least, if you want to support the podcast, please go to anchor.fm/horizon, spelled WHORIZON, to become a premium subscriber of On the Horizon, which unlocks 2 bonus episodes on the 8th and 22nd of each month with tons of extra exclusive footage from ourselves and our guests. This segment of today's episode is sponsored by Sex.com, one of the absolute best content creator platforms out there. It looks better than any other, has a higher level of security than any other, and boasts over 3 million unique visitors a day scrolling through viral looped adult short form videos. Sex.com is like, well, sex itself. A lot of people do it. Some just do it much, much better than the others. Sex.com. If you're going to do it right. Hello and welcome back to On the Horizon.
Yeah.
We are at episode 6, and this episode is all about intimacy, pleasure, and relationships.
Yeah, and we have 2 amazing and also very different guests,
yes.
Which is great. We have Stoya, which is very exciting for us. And Stoya's talking actually from the perspective of a sex columnist because she's co-writing a sex advice column at Slate right now and is getting lots of questions about
lots of things.
Lots of things, yeah. So, and then Sonora Grace is a provider in New Orleans who also does body healing work, and we're talking to her about that. So,
yeah, it was really unique to hear everyone's different perspective on intimacy and how that correlates and interweaves with pleasure and sex and sexuality. And I just think it's a good perspective. Something that doesn't get talked enough about, because everyone wants to talk about, well, everyone doesn't want to talk about sex, but when we do talk about sex, it doesn't often involve pleasure and intimacy.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that this has come up on several different episodes, that part of the problem with our sex education in the United States is, and I can't believe how loud it's raining.
Really loud, guys. Yeah. Sorry about that. If you can hear that, that's Mother Nature really excited about. She's really wet about this topic.
Really wet.
Really.
Yeah. I mean, we don't talk about pleasure. We talk about how to prevent pregnancy and STIs when we teach kids about sex, but we're not talking about pleasure and intimacy. And I mean, it's interesting because that's one of the things that I talked a lot to my kids about when they were teenagers and they started to ask questions about sex, is that they would say oh, we're going to be talking about sex at school. And then I would ask them what they're studying, and they're learning about diseases. They're learning about contraception. And I was like, okay, those are the mechanics of sex. Yeah. And the mechanics of sex and safety are important, but they're actually not even the biggest part of sex.
Yeah, no.
And so to talk about when we make decisions with our bodies with other people, that has emotional consequences. And I don't even mean negative consequences. I just mean
in general.
Yeah, just there are emotional impacts of sex. There are relational impacts of sex. So
that's a great segue into what Sonora actually brought to the table in her interview, was she really dug into the way that there's this give and take in a sexual encounter, and how you have this kind of dynamic of sometimes you're giving, sometimes you're taking, sometimes it's mutual, and that's all okay. And that was a very interesting conversation. I think you guys are going to get a lot out of it. I know I got a lot out of it.
Yeah.
So I think that we should just jump right in. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds good.
Today's episode is sponsored by ePlay, an adult live streaming platform creating an online ecosystem for creators to engage with their fans that's easy, exciting, and empowering. At ePlay, you earn 80% of revenue on everything from live streaming to private messages with your fans to your sub-club membership fan site. ePlay even allows you to earn money while you sleep with offline tips. Do what makes you excited, take control of your business, content, voice, and freedom as a creator. Consider joining ePlay today.
Sonora Grace is a sex worker, sexological body worker, somatic sex educator, ritualist, bee tender, and artist living and working in Bulbancha, colonially known as New Orleans. Using pleasure as a lens and the body as a portal to heal, she believes we can actively dismantle oppression and trauma individually and collectively. She is often found naked gardening, eating dark chocolate, and humming with the bees. All right. Hi, Sonora. It is great to have you on the horizon today.
Yes. Welcome. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yes. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
So can you introduce yourself, your work, and what you do?
Yeah, thank you. So my name is Sonora Grace. Sometimes people call me mistress or domina, but I work as a sex worker. I kind of really advertise as a sensual dominatrix and a erotic masseuse. Mm-hmm. I also have training as a sexological body worker and a somatic sex educator. And I have training in other types of counseling skills and deep listening skills and play and yoga and body and dance related modalities. And those things all impact my work as a sex worker. But yeah, I also offer like above ground. I like to call myself the town whore and give people in my community sensual massage if they want it, or people who are like probably like low touch or like are need of touch, like giving people pleasure in that way. And yeah, so I sort of operate in many different worlds, from like the underground, more criminalized world to the still above ground and still somewhat criminalized, but more accepted healing world.
Yeah. Do you feel like, it's interesting that you say that, because do those feel different to you, or do they feel different? How do they feel different?
In some ways, not at all. And then some ways the difference is just kind of who the clientele are. Like I would say that more of my clientele on the sex work side are cis het men. And then otherwise I'll get like women or trans folks or gender non-conforming folks. And I think that's just based on the reality of like who is taught they can pay for sex.
Yeah.
Like often as a woman, someone who socializes as a woman, and I'm not taught, I can just pay for sex when I want it. Or, you know, if I want a sensual massage, I could just go do that. And I honestly don't even sometimes think I can do that. And I work in this industry. So,
yeah, it's so funny that you say that, because like really the only like customer fantasy that I have ever is like getting an erotic massage, because like I love getting massages and I'm like, this massage is so amazing. It would be great if it like ended in an orgasm, but like you can't do that.
Yeah.
And so like, but I wouldn't, I feel like that too. Like I wouldn't even really, I'm live in a world surrounded by sex workers, and I like wouldn't know how to go about it.
The moment you said that, I thought that. I was like, I never, ever thought that. It's never crossed my mind that I could just go buy it. If I want it, I can just go do that.
But I totally would if I knew how to go about doing this. So maybe next time I'm in New Orleans.
Yeah. Definitely.
But yeah, so can you talk a little bit about like what somatic sex education and that piece of your work is?
Yeah, so thank you. That's, well, interestingly, the lineage of that work comes from sex workers. It's not exclusive to or exclusionary of, and it also ties back to the time of the AIDS epidemic and the time of people who were looking to find erotic services or have erotic experiences, but wanted to have safety and find ways to engage without like exchanging fluids necessarily, or having their needs met for touch and intimacy. So a lot of my work is steeped in caring for the body holistically in terms of like trauma, in terms of what might be happening internally or physiologically, what also might be happening or have happened in your past. So including trauma, including your emotional body, your spiritual body, and not separating those things, but really like integrating the whole of the person. And so my training includes a lot of hands-on touch, but exercises that help to let the client guide the experience in a way that feels most juicy, alive, safe, and hot for them.
I think I'm wondering, with all of the work that you do, especially such an intimate kind of work and all of the things that come along with that, is there something that someone who maybe is never going to come to a provider to get these needs met, or never going to seek out help with these facets of their sexuality or themselves, what is like a tool that you would say is the most commonly needed, like to get to someplace intimate with someone that is like lacking, or that you see constantly? Like this one piece is where people struggle with intimacy.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think that it's definitely in the world of shame and secrecy and the places where people hold, whether it's like a fantasy of like, maybe, it could be something like kinky related, or it could be just a fantasy that they think is wrong. Like, and being able to share that with someone, I don't like, sometimes people don't have friends they can share those type of things with. Right. But I think like that is the creation or the seed of intimacy, is like really being seen on the inside of like who you are, what's happening for you, and something that maybe it might be an entire part of your life that you're keeping, to yourself, or you're not allowing to be seen in the world. And I feel like that is often the barriers to intimacy, and often like what some people are grasping for when they want sex is like, they want to be seen fully. They want some part of them to be seen in the world. And, so I really love when people get to like share like, oh, they want this, like they want to wear women's panties, or they want to wear a diaper, or call me mommy, or, or just like sometimes a lot of it is just cry, like so much. My favorite and most wonderful thing in the world is when I get to see my clients cry, which happens a lot more than you think.
Does it usually like, have you seen a lot of that come out of like talking, or out of like touching, or out of like sexual intimacy, or where do you see that bubble up for clients?
Yeah. For me, that's like an art of both like the embodiment and the ability to like, create safe enough conditions for people to know that they can cry, or they can, be safe here. And sometimes it's a combination of like physical arousal and excitement and being held in that, or it's really so many things, but it's really, like for me, I would say that the biggest thing is creating the safety. And so I try to do that with deep listening, acceptance, sharing a lot of, like not, it's not even just not yucking their yum, but celebrating their thing that is like, that they feel shameful about. Like, you want to wear diapers? Yes. It's like, and not like in a overtly like comical way, but just like, like, thank you for sharing that with me.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I think that's, I kind of have a similar orientation to you, where I feel like oftentimes I feel like grateful for like what people will share. Like to be let into somebody's like inner feelings and inner thoughts and things that they don't share. And I very much agree that like, I mean, there's theorists who have talked about like the fact that what intimacy is, or how we could define intimacy is revealing, like a revelation of oneself.
Someone, yeah. You know, because I'm coming from strictly like a digital content creation background, but I found the same experience. Like I have so many clients that want to like sex or do calls or, you know, have content custom made about something that they haven't told anyone else. And I feel so privileged to that information. And also to the fact that like this person is willing to show me their whole selves versus the part that they show everybody else. So like, I think that there's something so special about that. It's a very beautiful thing. And it's also kind of sad because it's like, everyone should be able to see all of that. Like we're so fragmented in that way.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Would you qualify intimacy separate from sex? I know so many people wrap them together, but I've always felt those are two totally different things.
Yeah. I definitely think of them as separate. Like the things that I do, like purely, sometimes like, I don't think there's anything wrong with just having purely sexual like sessions or times where you just want to go for it, you know, like that is so, bang it out. Like, let's just go, you know? And there's something where like, even that, like the lack of intimacy can be like super juicy and fun. And I can totally appreciate that. And then there's the other times where just like eye gazing or, being able to like breathe with somebody can become like this releasing of like, the posturing or the amount of like, pretense that we all hold like throughout our days. Like you can let that go. Like that's, to me, that's the intimacy part. And I separate them, but I don't necessarily think one is better or greater than the other. Yeah.
What kind of work did you like have to do on yourself to to get to a place in which like you can hold that space for other people?
Oh my God.
That sounds hard. Genuinely.
Yeah. I mean, wow. Like I think that a lot of my friends know me as someone who just like, I go for the vulnerable, like wherever possible. And I'm kind of I don't want to say vulnerability addict, but like, I'm just like, oh my God, chance to be vulnerable in a group with a person. Like I thrive on that. I feel better with that. When I have like my friends or people close to me who are that way, like I need that. I need people to be vulnerable. So I'm kind of practicing vulnerability everywhere. And I've definitely like in my training, it's like, you know, we're going around and like, telling the stories of our genitals to each other, like just like, here we go, like just the whole body, nothing is shameful anymore. It's just all out there. And I would say that that's something that I've gotten to do with lovers, with friends in my community. I mean, just sometimes being like, the other day I had a group of women over for an erotic practice in the moonlight outside. And it's like, you know, it's just like being able to fully expose myself as much as possible. And you know, sometimes I'm discreet in ways too, but like, I think I look for those opportunities and try to create them if I don't have them already.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah. So like the topic of our episode today is what sex workers can teach people outside of sex work about like intimacy or relationships. So what do you feel like you've learned that you would only learn through sex work, or at least that maybe you've only learned through sex work, about relationships and about intimacy and about like interacting with other people that you kind of think that your experience as a sex worker helped shape? Yeah.
Yeah. Such a good question. I think there's something really deep about self-worth here where like I learned that both I am worthy to be paid for my services, my body, my intellect, even my ability to listen, my emotional labor. Like I am worthy of that in a literal, like transactional way. But I'm also beyond that, like it's taught me that that worth is translatable to the rest of my life. Like it's not about if I'm paid or not. And in fact, like my clients like show me beyond money that like I'm worth it. And then I get to see and practice that in my life. I was just having this conversation last night where I realized that like my role especially as a dom and, but just someone who facilitates an experience like of intimacy for someone else is that my level of confidence, my level of self-worth is just like grown exponentially because of it.
You know, it's so funny that you say that, because we've spoken about this even in season 1, that like me getting into sex work in like, I got into as a cam girl, and like seeing myself, the image of myself back in a cam chat room setting taught me to love my body, because that was something I had to overcome and really struggled with. And like the people that grew up with me were so shocked that I got into this kind of work because they knew about my struggles with my body. So I think that there's a lot to be said about self-worth. And even like I have a dear friend who just is getting out of a relationship, and I was like, let's do a photo shoot. And he was like, so like, I don't know. I'm like, let's just do it. It'll be fun. Like, just give it a chance. And we did it. And his self-confidence is through the roof. He loved the photos, like just kind of getting the space to understand worth in oneself is so powerful and so transformative. And I agree that that's something I only got from sex work.
Yeah. For
That's
sure.
amazing.
Yeah, I love that. The photo shoots for sure. Like every photo shoot I do, I feel like I have like a crisis point of like, who am I? What do I want? And then I do the photo shoot and I'm like, wow. And it's like, it's like a beautiful ritual of like transformation and seeing oneself and getting to like appreciate and love on oneself.
It's so rare to see yourself from someone else's lens. You know, there's not a lot of ways to do that unless you're seeking them out or like making them intentional. So I think that reflectiveness is super nice.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting too, because I like had to, I made like a very conscious like decision when I started working with different photographers where you know, when a photographer where you'll do a photo shoot with somebody and then the photographer will like put a picture that they like on social media and it's like not necessarily what you like. And like, I've had this experience. And at first I wanted to be like, oh, I'm not going to interact with that or like whatever. And then I was like, no, I actually am, because they're seeing something that like my own like biases about my body or about, you know, whatever is preventing me from being able to like see what's good about it.
Yeah.
And so like letting that go and being like, somebody out of all of the things like picked this. So
saw beauty. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Totally. When I've had days where I feel like crap, like let's just say I'll have like I'll have like an emotionally hard day or something, or maybe I don't feel good in my body, and I'll have a session with a client and I'll walk out of there like, like I feel good, and not just like for so many reasons. Like one, because I got to help facilitate someone else's experience. Two, because they appreciated my experience and what I gave them, and because also I love like being in my body and feeling like erotically connected to somebody.
Yeah,
like,
I know.
Okay, like. Here we go.
Yeah.
It's the best.
Yeah. I feel that.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes I'm like, I would rather just sit at home and watch TV. But then, but then once you get into something, you're like, oh, but this is an amazing thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
There can be like so much beauty.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So like, do you feel like you're, obviously it's going to impact you, but how does your work like impact your own like intimate relationships? Does it how does it shape them? And do you feel, how do you react? How do you interact differently with like partners and lovers than you do with your clients?
Yeah, great question. Well, it was actually interesting. I think after you and I did our interviews, and I at one point held a workshop with another provider, and we did a workshop for sex workers on relationships. Oh, cool. And we started, it was really beautiful. We had like a good turnout, and there was really deep conversations. And one of the big questions or things that were illuminated for me was, how are my relationships different? How is my relationship to dating really different than dating professionally, essentially? Yeah. And what are my standards different, And so like with my clients, like they'll bring me gifts or chocolate or flowers, and they're like really, like there's such a chivalry process, and it's like so nice. And then I realized at one point, like I didn't have like dates who weren't doing like, I would say they were just doing like maybe the minimum, but like once I like set the standard, was like, no, my clients are like at least the standard, the minimum. Then I started to have dates that brought it on, like got me the nice gifts or like put out the effort. And I would say that like, I learn a lot from my clients, like how I want to be treated and how I don't want to be treated. Because I have clients who like, I'm like, no, that was not what I wanted, or that's not, for me. But I feel like it's similar to being poly, or like, okay, like I had this experience with this person. What can I take from it to this other experience? And there's a lot of that I find really juicy and like exciting and helpful to my own life. Like if I get like that memory of something in my body, or I'll bring things from my personal life into my erotic life. And they definitely like weave together in a nice way. And it requires boundaries, of course, too. So I have like some things I won't do with clients, and that's great too. They respect that, and it works out.
Do you feel like there's things that we didn't ask you about that are pertinent to this topic?
I'm like, masturbate more. Yeah, that's a good one. I guess one thing I just that came up around into the conversation I had with the workshop I had with other providers, and we were talking about relationships and what's the difference and what are the things that get in the way. And a lot of people really struggled with what they wanted and where their no was, where their yes was, where their boundaries were. And I think that still like is work that I'm forever grateful sex work teaches me, like how to figure out my boundaries, how to know what I don't want, how to know what I want. And I think it's constant practice to just like keep checking in with. And I definitely, I think that it's something that any other profession, like no other profession gives me quite the experience to get it, to figure it out. Like it's like, it's such an important and visceral experience of like, I overrided that boundary, or I really don't want that. Okay, wait, and then what do I do? What do I want? Becomes the real question. And so I've found that more and more that I spend time like dreaming about or masturbating to or writing about what I do want, then those things actually also come too.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
I love that. Yeah. Where can people find you in your writing? And
so I do randomly post blogs on sonoragrace.com. And I have a post about pleasure and sex work. And that's really was a fun post to write. And then I'm on Twitter at Grace Sonora, and on Instagram at Sonora Grace. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah. Wonderful to meet you all. Thank you.
This episode of On the Horizon is sponsored by DMCA Force. DMCA Force is the authorized DMC agent for the largest online creators and the platforms that they monetize. DMCA Force protects models, musicians, writers, videographers, artists, and tons of other creatives publishing their works online. With DMCA Force, you get 24/7 automated monitoring, flagging, and removal of stolen and pirated content. They use metadata and keywords relating to your work in collaboration with search engines to remove even the 10 to 15% of content on ghost sites that can't typically be scrubbed from the internet. They even offer the ability to fingerprint content and digitally watermark it as an added layer of security to protect the art you work so hard creating. Join DMCA Force today.
Jessica Stoya started performing in pornographic videos in 2006. Stoya is half of Slate's How to Do It sex advice column and has written about pornography for publications including Playboy, The New York Times, and Jiz Lee's anthology Coming Out Like a Porn Star.
Hi, Stoya. Thank you for joining us on the Horizon.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so can you introduce yourself?
So I started performing in pornographic video in 2006. I spent several years as a contract performer, started writing during that time. Several very not well paid pieces for Vice, and 2 New York Times op-eds later, I am half of Slate's sex advice column, How to Do It. And I'm basically a surprise sex educator, accidental sex educator who is scrambling to get education. But no matter what I read up on or take a class in, there's always some curveball where I'm like, I don't have a resource for that. And then you have to find one.
Interesting.
What do you think about, I mean, I think what you're saying is really interesting because we do have this like sort of odd situation where like there is no sex education, but there is this ubiquity of porn. And so people are kind of turning to porn for sex education. Yeah. And I've heard a lot of performers who are really frustrated by that and who are like, I'm not actually a sex educator. I'm a performer or I'm an entertainer.
Yeah.
Like, what are your feelings about that? Do you feel like that's an unfair expectation to put on performers, or do you feel like there should be some middle space where there's like porn literacy? Or
yeah, so I'm gonna get real personal and weird.
Okay, go ahead.
I grew up in a certain kind of Southern church. It was the charismatic church.
Oh, okay.
And the charismatic movement is like global now. Mm-hmm. But when I was a kid, church meant like one of the church officials walking down a line of people and waving their hand over the people's foreheads without touching them. And then keeling over backwards, convulsing, speaking in what we called tongues. Mm-hmm. Like the understanding was they have been possessed by the spirit. Mm-hmm. And also there was a lot of leaders in the church were called with the word. Mm-hmm. They were called, they were moved by God to their work. And I feel moved towards sex education in a way that I think is great for me, but should not be required of any other sex worker, regardless of like what they do, how talented they might be at it. Like sex education is really complicated, slippery. There's a lot of toxic stuff to like uproot and, for someone who isn't going through the academic system and in possession of a master's degree, it's really hard to get useful education.
Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm.
Like when I landed the Slate gig, I was like, okay, so I have a mail order high school diploma. And I read a lot. But as much as I can like read plenty of sexual theory, like I feel like I ought to hang out with like the like official sex educators and like learn some stuff, because I have like this like concerningly large platform and I'm being framed as an authoritative voice, and I'm fielding questions about like all kinds of wide sprawling social and relationship stuff that like is not my department.
Yeah.
If you need ideas for how to position yourself for sex with someone whose penis curves to the left, like I got you. That is totally my comfort zone.
Yeah.
But like all the other stuff, I'm like, I'm not prepared for this. Nothing in my life has prepared me for this. I need to get prepared for this.
Yeah.
So I reached out to ASECT, which is the American Association of Sexuality Educators and Counselors and Therapists. And, they kind of brushed me off.
Oh, wow.
And it was due to my lack of formal education.
Wow.
And they were, though, like maybe Bianca Laureano would be like a good place for you. So I looked up Bianca, and one of the first things I saw from her, and see, she has the master's, but she went to ASECT and she felt shut out. And she'd written a blog detailing the issues that she encountered that made her feel not accepted.
Yeah. Interesting.
And I was like, oh, okay, great. And this person has a class on intersectionality, which is a word I hear flying around, and like, great.
Yeah.
And I ended up taking Bianca's whole professional development certificate program.
In sex education?
I learned a lot. It's for people. It's kind of like, it's like a dual purpose. Like it's like in the ASECT system.
Okay.
And so like the person who does sex ed at the university and has their master's degree and needs to do like continuing ed credits every year to keep their like certification or whatever. They're like licensed to practice or something. So some people are there for that. Yeah. And other people are like me. And it's like, I have no formal training. Yeah. Like, hello. And Bianca's super accepting with that. But we covered intersectionality, reproductive justice, disability justice.
That's great. Yeah.
Anatomy through the lens of intersex experiences.
That's amazing.
Like it was some really fascinating stuff. But I'm also like, okay, and there's also so many other gaps that I need to fill. Yeah.
What are some of like the gaps that like you think of when you're like, what's missing here?
So, sometimes I get these letters from these people who are like clearly in a bad situation, but they do not want to leave, right? They come for me asking for help in how to navigate their bad situation while remaining in it. Yeah. And we got pushback from readers and the editor early on for being quick to jump to like, move on. So partially because like the request is not, should I leave this person? It's how do I stay and keep my sanity? So I should answer the question then given. And also like the publication prefers that I, so there's pressure to do that. And I would like more understanding in when it is time to call it. Right. Like I would like more nuanced understanding in that area that I could then use to form questions I suggest the person ask themselves to like figure out what their limit is, to make sure that the door is in fact open for them to make a real choice instead of perhaps ending up feeling like they're stuck. And I'm like, I'm not prepared for that. Right. So, I can reach out to experts, which I do. And you do like kind of learn things along the way, but reading a whole book or taking a whole class in something gives a lot more nuance than like an expert who isn't getting paid and gives me 2 paragraphs. Has this been a really, have you enjoyed this? Has it been neat to kind of do this like advice column in the way that you're doing it? Have you gotten a lot out of it or? It's incredible. And like one of my dear friends, thinks they might have COVID. They have a penis and they're worried about COVID dick. And I was like, well, thanks to the one season of the How to Do It podcast that we had, I actually know like kind of a lot about COVID dick. And in my pretty decently educated opinion, jerk off. If you can get hard, like you're probably doing okay. Just like kind of keep things running. And also that gives you something fun to do rather than stress about it. And like that's not the kind of knowledge that I would have if it weren't for this gig. And being able to like being like, yes, I have this situation under control. It's a really good feeling. There's something nice about being specialized where it's like, yes, this is what I'm good at.
I think it's interesting too, because even like as a role coming from the sex work industry, there's a lot of education that non-sex workers obviously don't get because they don't get a lot of sex education in general, but there's so many things that people see in porn or see acted out in these like clips or OnlyFans or wherever they're consuming their content that they just think you can just go do. Like, I think there's so much to be said about what sex, like sex workers can teach non-sex workers about like, no, you can't just like do anal. Like there's things you got to do before you can just like do that. Like, that's not how that works. I was wondering what your experience on that was like. Have you found navigating between both of these, like, you know, sex work world and mainstream world or vanilla world, like that has been your experience?
So, I got a question recently from a woman who'd fantasized about gangbangs for years. She moved to a new place. It's gangbang city. She got gangbanged. And I'm like, all right, I'm thrilled for you. But also like, I have some like porn wisdom, and I'm going to check that porn wisdom with an actual pussy doctor first.
Yeah.
So I emailed the pussy doctor, and I'm like, hey, she's actually like Stacey DeLynn, associate medical director at Planned Parenthood.
Okay.
But it's more fun to say pussy doctor. But I emailed Dr. DeLynn, and I'm like, hey, so from my porn days, my gut says a little bit of coconut oil and sit on a bag of frozen peas or corn. And Stacey is like, Dr. Stacey is like, no coconut oil.
Why?
Some people may be sensitive or even allergic.
Oh, wow. Interesting. Because when I was a doula, we used coconut oil.
Okay.
Interesting. Yeah. That's my association with coconut oil.
As a tangent, let me finish Dr. Stacey first. And she's like, bag of corn or peas, great idea. Put a towel between the vulva and the bag, though. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Like, that would have made my career a lot more comfortable. But, and also she recommended a sitz bath, just the Epsom salt, warm water. And possibly, you know, more lube next time was also one of the recommendations. But I have this fantasy of doing an article where I go through everything and consult a few pussy doctors with a few different kinds of perspectives about like, hey, so someone told me not to douche with, I mean, everyone knows, not everyone. I thought everyone knows not to douche with the actual douche liquid. But then someone told me not to douche with LA tap water either, and especially not to do an enema with it. So then I started using bottled water, and I'm like, I would like to know, right? Yeah. Was I wasting bottled water that whole time, or would LA tap water actually have caused a problem? The sea sponge thing, right? When we're menstruating and we need to shoot a penetration scene, and we take a boiled sea sponge or a makeup sponge, which I find horrifying. I'm not horrified by the sea sponge, but I am horrified by the makeup sponge. I don't know.
I've never heard that. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm very curious. This is like an LA studio porn trick.
The makeup sponge
I'm very curious,
trick
like,
too. Yeah.
Okay. I'm curious what a gynecologist would have to say about this. Like, is this brilliant? Is this potentially opening us up for problems? Like, I'd like to know. Because sometimes this like kind of word of mouth community wisdom can also be like strange and ineffectual. Yeah. Or even dangerous. I'm really curious.
Yeah, right. Well, we actually have to, like, that's a good place to end. Can you tell everybody where to find your column and the rest of your work?
Slate.com/HTDI is the how to do it page. It has my columns, Rich's columns, our chat columns, and the podcast episodes, plus the question submission form, which is anonymous.
Awesome.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I'm Stoya on Twitter and Instagram. My blog site, hellostoya.com, is infrequently updated, but sometimes updates go there.
Okay,
awesome.
Great. It was really fun to talk to you.
Yes. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Who misses free and affordable ads without the anti-sex work rhetoric? Assembly 4 is a team of sex workers and technologists from Melbourne, Australia, aiming to bring back free and fair advertising to the sex work community. They also give back to organizations based in harm reduction, sex work, and education. Stepping away from the clunky design of traditional platforms, their platform, Tris.link, is a refreshing and well-needed change in both presentation and mission. It is free to join and open to all. In the words of an A4 user, from the policies to the language to the advice and tips, it makes such a big difference to feel encouraged and supported instead of policed.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of On the Horizon, a podcast about what's on the horizon for sex workers and how to navigate it.
I'm Jessie Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at sapiotextual and at jessiesage.com.
And I'm Melrose Michaels, and you can find me at Melrose Michaels on social and melrosemichaels.com.
Just a reminder, if you are enjoying the podcast on Apple, please leave us a 5-star rating and review because it really helps us to grow as a podcast and better share information from our guests to the sex work community as a whole.
Last but not least, if you want to support the podcast, please go to anchor.fm/horizon, spelled WHORIZON, to become a premium subscriber of On the Horizon, which unlocks 2 bonus episodes on the 8th and 22nd of each month with tons of extra exclusive footage from ourselves and our guests.